Bridging cultures is a term which I have always thought of with positivity, and I believe it to be positive still. Though it does suggest a divide, a chasm over which we have to manufacture a connection. And that is the point which makes me think, is that what I want to do or represent? Diverse cultures do not need to be bridged. They do not need to be necessarily linked or connected, though fusion restaurants are apparently quite the trend. Cultural diversity should be embraced, enjoyed, and observed with open recognition. I don't want to address someone's culture with trepidation because they might think I have race superiority issues. I want to openly engage with someone and admire, respect, and enjoy their cultural diversity. I would hope to exchange that experience with them too, if they want. Listening to Florah, there are many cultural elements we refer to in different ways, and I wonder if you can catch the playfulness in Florah's voice when she speaks of the joys of her culture, and at the same time the subtle frustration when she recalls exchanges with older white men whose prejudices did not permit them to communicate respect and hospitality when they should have. Society has a lot yet to learn about respect and tolerance. It might start by showing appreciation for cultures that have existed for thousands of years and ask for nothing but their due. They have been made to work for it for far too long. Thank you so much, Florah, for your time. It was such a pleasure to speak with you, and I look forward to the next time. Enjoy.
The podcast from to.I is, I think it's really cool, and that is what I wanted to say.
Two and a mic. I'm joined by Florah, who I've had the pleasure of knowing now for a couple of years, but I finally managed to build up the confidence and courage to ask you to do a podcast with me. Florah, thank you very much for saying hi.
Thank you so much for reaching out on this. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to always talk to you. You know that.
That's very kind of you. We've had a few interesting conversations. Just to point out, so we first met at a sort of hiking, I can't say retreat, but this group connected to Friends of Nature in a wonderful part of Germany called the Allgäu, and this town is Oberstdorf. But I think you've been a long-term member or attendee of this hiking thing. I've only been there a couple of years. How long have you been with Friends of Nature?
About 6 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't had the pleasure to do all the trips that they organize, but at least I do one or two a year, and it's always wonderful company. We get to meet. I mean, this is how we get to meet such connections, and it's wonderful to be out in nature while enjoying interesting conversations, people left-leaning and
very, yeah.
I feel at home. I believe you do too.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm also, even though everybody is, as you say, very much interested in nature and sustainability and has, politically speaking, this left-leaning perspective, I'm still not surprised. I'm pleased to see the level of diversity that there is within the group. As in, even though a lot of people are quite similar in perspectives, at the same time, people have different perspectives. We don't adhere everybody almost like this robotic view to a single way of seeing the world. There are different views, different methods of achieving perhaps similar targets, and people from lots of different backgrounds. It was great. I mean, I'm sure you fit into that obviously in many ways, but from our discussions, it's clear that you also observe these things.
I do indeed. We all in a way, I mean, we encourage discussion, we encourage arguments. It can get very heated at some points, but we all know we are in a similar boat. We in the deepest parts of our hearts, we are similar in certain ways, but of course, there's room for debate, discussions, heated sometimes. But at the end of it, we all, how do I say, there is space for diversity, and diversity in opinion, diversity in culture, diversity in how we perceive the world, and but these are all welcome. So this is a gem.
Yeah, absolutely. And to have this, it was also really good with the way that Friends of Nature organized these trips. I haven't experienced a Friends of Nature event not organized by Uwe Margi and the team at from Berlin, but yeah, this emphasis on coming together, this emphasis on doing things together, this emphasis on being involved and helping one another. It does kind of come through in everything that they organize.
It does indeed, and to bring it together. I mean, with since we are, or rather, I am a member of the Berlin chapter, and with Uwe being at the helm of these organizations, the emphasis in doing all this in nature, and also having it touches me in many ways. You know, my ancestors used to pray to their ancestors and give libations at the foot of the biggest tree, or whichever tree that was, and nature was appreciated. So I do feel at home.
Which brings us to obviously a very large part of our talk today. So you are of African descent. If I'm not mistaken, Kenya is where you would call home, yes?
Yes, yeah. Indeed, it's home. It's interesting because we refer to home, and I believe I talk to for many other Africans, but at least for the people that I know and my family. When I mention home, it is where my parents are, or it is where I grew up. And so being in Germany, I've had to unlearn that and say, home is where I am right now, but it's still home. When I talk about home, when I'm with my people, as in those who come from Kenya, when I mention home, they know I refer to Kenya. I refer to where my parents are, or where my mother is.
Yeah, by the same token, I guess then for your boy Philip, he would also say home is where you are. I guess that would be essentially Berlin, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it's interesting, that association. I also read in LinkedIn recently, a woman posted, she's from Ukraine, so the family fled the war, and she said, yeah, I told my parents home is where mum is. So whether that's in Ukraine or Berlin, and I think that's a very powerful statement to make. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. When I say home, that's I'm talking about home where my mother is. And I can go and she can fold me in her arms and I feel like, oh, I'm home.
Okay. Yeah. Did you get a chance often to go home then back to Kenya?
I do. I call it my annual pilgrimage because it has ended up being that. When I was in Kenya, I was living in Nairobi, and my mother was living in a small town called Migori. And I saw her a lot less than I see her now, because when I go now, I have a concentrated 3-week where I spend at least 2 of those weeks with or around her. So I end up seeing her more. It's a pilgrimage as it is. It's different from what it was back then.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I miss my mum as well, my family back in London, and yeah, I think there's no substitute for family in many ways. But of course, we make friends along the way, and sometimes our work becomes a part of us, a part of our families in some cases too. And that allows me to ask you about your work, because that's also a passion, in addition to being what sustains you, isn't it?
It is indeed. As I mentioned during some of our conversations, I am in conservation right now, but I did not start off in conservation. But the baseline of my work experience is in fundraising, and as you will also see or hear from the other podcast, I talk about storytelling, but it is also about communication and understanding what makes one tick in order to give. So conservation, I came into it I call myself a small scale farmer in Kenya. I I buy little bits of land and I plant hardwood native trees just because I am shocked, or rather I feel sad at the rate at which we are destroying what is native and what is powerful, and putting up eucalyptus. I see eucalyptus and I want to go in a fit of a rage and slash it all, but it is what I can do. So conservation and the love of nature just plays a big role, and this is where I am at right now. And so I'm working for African Parks Network and the foundation in Germany. I'm leading it, and I'm fundraising, but mainly I focus on high net worth individuals. And so the way we shape our storytelling to these people or to this category of donors, and to each, because each is a very specific prospect journey, is quite interesting. How to make this person who barely has time and is probably buying a yacht somewhere and sailing the seas, or buying a bunker somewhere because they're afraid of global warming and they want to live high above the rising sea level as possible. How do I make them give back, and how do I speak to the right parts of their feel of globalization and what the global nature gives to us is quite interesting. It has its ups and downs, and their successes. There are failures, but it's all a learning process, and we are working towards preserving what needs to be preserved in Africa.
Yeah, and just to add, the podcast to which you referred is the TU, the university alumni podcast, which I will put a link to in the podcast notes for this one as well, because it's a great it gives a lot of very good background detail as to what you do, how you do it, and you also talk a bit more about the storytelling and how you sort of fit it to you kind of make it very individualistic for the people with whom you are communicating, and I do like that, and it's always good to support these other podcasters.
Just to mention something, the podcast is called Zukunftsmacherinnen, like the future makers. I'm a bit embarrassed about that, because I would not necessarily, categorize myself as that, but it is what it is. We do our little parts to make the future better, but I doubt I'm a future maker, but it is what it is.
Well, I mean, I suppose you represent an organization which is there as much as possible to create or to allow the possibility for sustaining these large areas, these parks in Africa, that future generations can see them. So you participate at least in this role, don't you?
I do.
Yeah. So they're not wide of the mark from that perspective, but story. I mean, we've got so many topics, and as I kind of suggested before, I would love to have a kind of series with you as much as your time would allow, because there are so many different topics that we can talk about. But you mentioned there's storytelling. Storytelling is a very culturally unique art. Every culture has a different way of telling stories. And Africa is very rich in storytelling traditions, which unfortunately, you wouldn't be able to walk into every European bookstore and pick up an African storytelling book, or go into an African storytelling um, part or department. How much of your cultural heritage can you actually put in to the storytelling that you use for raising funds?
Thanks for that question, because just the other day I was singing a lullaby to the daughter of a friend of mine, and she's Kenyan. And I turned around and I only know one or two songs to sing a child to sleep. And then I turned to her and asked, "Do you have any other songs?" And she told me, "But we all sang just this one in Swahili." And we were reflecting on that, and I reflected back and I said, well, we never sang our children we don't sing our children to sleep where I come from in Kenya. What we do is, and what was done and sadly is dying out, just because we are so consummated, with media and let's watch television and then go to bed. But we told stories. It was a turn of somebody to tell a story in the night right before, the kids went to sleep, or the parents told stories. It was always about creativity of stories, but it focused a lot about, life and the rural areas, or stories about animals, or stories, wild animals. They all had characters, specific characteristics attributed to each animal, and you could weave stories with that. Sorry, that was just anecdotal, but in my case, I love language and languages, and for a while I consumed a lot of books, and at some point I specifically told myself that I am not going to consume only Western literature. And I am part of a Goodreads group that chooses a book by a person of color a month and read it and debate and talk about it. So it's just my love for language and my love for being able to, and I love to speak, as I hope I love to listen to.
I think
I'm
you're going
working
to
on
say.
that. I'm working on that. But it is the compelling narrative that one develops, and how to bring the accent, or the stress on different parts of it in order to reach someone. That is quite interesting. I think in another life I might have just been a writer, but I guess I did try once, but I sat there with my empty notebook, and I realized this isn't going to work for you, Flora. You have to move on.
Yeah, you never struck me as somebody who talks too much, nor indeed, when given the opportunity of speaking, tries to dominate the agenda. But I do believe, as in, first impressions are interesting, because and we're also going to talk about this, because you have some interesting stories about first impressions, and we'll come to that. A first impression I had of you, you obviously have a very big smile, um, and it's wonderful to see somebody smiling, because when I see someone smiling, I also perversely realize that it's so rare to see someone smiling. You walk down the street and everybody's vexed or stressed or thinking about, damn, what do I have to do next? But it's wonderful to see somebody so comfortably carry a smile as you do. But you also have a very what's the best way of saying it? You're very, it seems, determined, and you have a very determined look about you. It almost seems as though when I look at you and I saw you, that you knew where you were going, and because of the smile, you were very happy to be going there. That's the image that I first had of you. So just to put that in now.
Oh,
Is
and
that wrong?
I
Yeah.
do, one of those things because the winters here are dour and people have long faces, and I just get access to or talk to random strangers on the train, and I compliment them on this color that they're wearing, or I compliment them on the book they're reading, or how they look, and it's almost they're always taken aback for a second. And then they smile back and they're so happy. And you see this person carrying that smile for a couple more minutes until we walk out of the. It doesn't cost much. It really doesn't. And I guess I'm also, how do you say, uh, in that generosity, I'm also getting back. It's not purely, it's not purely giving. I'm also getting back.
True. Yeah, but
Yeah,
you have to give of yourself, don't you, sometimes
yes,
to receive. So
indeed. We're talking about that determination, and it's also anecdotal. I'm straddling cultures, and if one doesn't go through life straddling cultures with determination to make a change, or to just enjoy life, or to achieve what one sets to achieve, then one is lost in that morass in between. And it's interesting to talk about it because there are so many elements why that determination has to carry me across my work, but also just life in general, being in Germany, also having to travel to the eastern parts of Germany, and come out and not feel like I want to pack my bags and go back to Kenya. So it's one of those that I wear it. Probably I wear it as a shield. Could that be? I wonder. I have to ponder about that a bit more.
yeah. First impressions and conversations is it was when we had our chat to talk about things. Maybe today it's going to seem a bit like we're jumping around from topic to topic, but I really want to get a good grounding, as it were, and then maybe in the future we can expand on some topics. But you off well, you said about when you meet new people for the first time and you've already interacted with them. That you can see a bit of perhaps confusion on their faces when you first appear. And I love that little story. Well, please, if you would like to sort of retell it, because it's just fantastic.
Sure thing, and that is mainly related to my work. So I do interact with say, for instance, in my previous job, I interacted a lot with ministries, and I had several meetings with high level ranking ministry officials, or talking to foundations, or even to some of the donors that I meet. So the first conversations, and because they just don't have time to Google and find out who this woman is who's talking to them. My surname is Ikawa Witte, and Ikawa sounds very Japanese, and Witte is so white German Dutch that there is the presumption that I am not black. Let's just we put it like that. So finally, when we get to meet, and you're walking into a boardroom and open the door, and people are sitting and waiting, and I'm coming in either by myself or my CEO, or any other person I'm bringing along. And I walk in, and it is almost always sure that they look above and over my shoulder to see the Ikawa Witze coming into the room, and they dismiss me. The dismissal is so, I've learned to see it, I've learned to enjoy it. And then, come in and sit down. And after the round of introductions, and sadly, I sit in front of many older white men, and a lot of some of the stereotypes are true. And so they start speaking, and they start speaking over me, as we say it, and I let it. I listen, and I just let them do that for a bit until it's my time to interject or to speak and have an argument or just present. And I do love to. I play it. I do love to, when I'm presenting, I get up and I pace the room just because I don't like to sit down and sort of, I interpose some power, but it's because I must do this. And the shock when they finally get to listen to me, it's always so palpable. It is brilliant. I'm laughing inside. But these are the things I have to deal with, being a Black woman working in a very dominantly white older male society, and having to achieve the result I set out to achieve. So there goes determination again.
Yeah, and I mean, it's amazing that you can do this with the regularity, and of course thereafter the success that follows. I mean, you said that it's not always success. You know, sometimes there are, you know, you can't achieve what you want to achieve, and that's obviously part of any job that we engage in. But the point is having the courage to push open that door and walk through it, and despite knowing this is probably going to happen. I've heard lots of people talk about this from a different perspective, and it's like, you know, why do I always have to justify my presence? Why do I always have to fight a corner that any other person or a white person would just simply be able to walk in and be immediately accepted that they have a right to be in that room? And yet I have to fight for that. And yeah, it's a hateful side of how unequal society continues to be. But I think your approach can only tell me that you will win that argument every time. I'd love to be a fly on the wall, to be honest, and see that. One day, please take me along.
I will get ready for this.
I can't wait. We're wonderful to see that. If it ever happens, I would love to do that. Yeah. So okay. So also the fundraising. In the other podcast, you say something really interesting, and it's something that I've often thought about because I've worked with other NGOs, and raising money and finances in general is a huge part of every non-governmental organization, because they simply cannot rely on sort of tax, not necessarily tax benefits, but money from the taxation system. So it's very important that you are successful in doing what you do, and it's such a small portion of the economy that goes to NGOs. And you mentioned this thing about partnerships, and that's also, you know, the SDG goal number 17 is about partnerships. Why is it so hard to develop partnerships with other organizations in raising money, do you think?
I believe the biggest part is that many organizations, also a founder mentality plays a big role in that, is they seek to be the best at what they do, create their name, get the recognition and the power that they can do what it is they set out to do. The problem is that not one organization can be a solution to a specific niche of a problem. There are interconnectivities. And it sort of ends up being the same capitalistic mindset. It's a dog eat dog world. I want to get as much. I want to grow. I want to have this organization under my name that has X number of staff and that is raising X amount of money. And so they are so focused internally on their own, you know, finding or creating space for themselves. It's like a dog marking its path on a tree. It is that, and it is sadly harming the potential impact that collaboration could bring. And as we go along, as monies get, as more organizations proliferate the giving space, there is less and less that is then divided among so many more. There are NGOs sprouting left, right, and center. It is just this very, very selfish. Let's call it as it is. And I will, giving examples of some organizations that I have consulted for and with. One cannot do everything on their own. So the need for collaboration is so much greater than the need for their own self-sustenance, and which is why I chose to work for African Parks, because our funding model is not one that is going to make us, I'm not looking at having a team of 50 people working under me. I am working alone, so to speak, in Germany, and covering bit of the DACH area, as I call it, Switzerland and Austria. And it is to get this, as much of this amount down to the parks and to where it's needed, instead of funding a huge number of staff who's working on small grants and calling it, oh, we're a big organization. It is the bigness, or I want the power play of having X number of staff or X amount of money coming my way is a lot stronger than the impact that could be achieved if people work together. The interconnectivities, when we're talking about conservation, is so key. We were talking about community, engaging communities. We're talking about tourism on the one side, but also on having landscape approaches, or having cross-border approaches that would essentially require, in order to have a broader, stronger impact, it would require collaborations. So I went a lot longer than I should have done, but I do get very frustrated when it comes to the piecemeal ways that NGOs work, and the whole NGO spirit of collaboration is lost. And it does take a lot to get people to think together.
Yeah, and there's no limit to how long you can take to answer a question. It's great, because the more that you talk, the more thoughts come out. So you kind of expand upon an issue which I only know a little part of, and you give a greater response within that same context. Well, as you were talking, I also had this thought that you mentioned that the proliferation of NGOs, and clearly there are organizations whose sole intention is to divert money away from certain other NGOs, and it's to sort of kind of, as much as is possible, to control the flow of those finances into maybe European or American or Canadian areas, and to kind of deprive other areas of some of those funds. Because otherwise, why else would there be so many of these groups forming up, so many lobby groups, so many NGOs, and so many charities, even though I'm sure all of them have a wonderful concept, a passionate group of recipients who are well deserving of that. But I sometimes ask myself whether or not the intentions of the founders is as pure as they want us to make out. And there have been instances in the past of groups completely misusing the funds and the authority that they have been supposedly given to spend those funds. And there I have to ask a question: are these people really in it for what they say, or is there another sort of an ulterior motive? That's just it's a bit conspiratorial, but it really pisses me off.
It is not conspiratorial at all. I'll give you an anecdote. Look at the churches and the sects that are and I give the example of, I talk about my own country, I talk about Africa in general, but the best examples are in the US. This preacher or pastor, or however they call them, has bought a huge jet, has bought himself. He walks around, he's preaching, and he says, look at my shoes. They cost $900, you know. So, and then this is sort of the mindset that some people have. It is about gaining money. It's about self-enrichment, and which is why a lot of foundations now have come up with very, very strong due diligence, which costs a lot of time, takes a lot of money. But it is due to such examples that we are now facing a lot of much more scrutiny, much more time in due diligence, which is great. It is just a lot just because we suffer from those that have misused funds for their own gain. And there are many such. There are very many such charities. The anecdote with the churches is just, it brings it, much more clearer about, founders who are in it for the money. And it is not only the charitable purpose that they said or that they wrap it up to be.
Thank you for that prime example, because none particular came to mind when I was just expressing my frustration. So thank you. Let's move on to something more positive again, because that is a part of the point of our discussion. You've got a very interesting group of women of Kenyan culture in Berlin. Please tell me about it, because even though it sounds quite a specific group of women, Kenyan women, there's also an interesting element of diversity even within that group, isn't there?
Indeed, there is. Just shortly to say that the person who came up with this idea, and this is what happens when one comes from, you come from one country, you move to the other. I'm just lucky that I'm very social, so I did not have to gravitate to have a link to Kenyan people in Germany. It was in an ad hoc way that I met them. But this woman who started this group set out to have no more than 10, 15 women who are there to support the other members of the group in all ways, shapes, and forms. So the diversity in the group is, in essence, multicultural within the Kenyan society. So we all come from different. We still end up being very, very tribal in a way, because we speak all those languages, and languages separate us. But it's across those divides, and it's across the professional divide as well. So we're having lawyers, we're having accountants, we have people who are in housekeeping. So it is very diverse. So it's not an elite group, but it is a group that is, we share that part of our culture that we're not able to find here, which is, we are those people. We carry our histories and our cultures in us, and they are rich. And once you cross that divide and you're living somewhere else in a different country, you lose the community. You lose the enjoyment of being in that community. The jokes that we tell, I'll say a word and we'll all fall down laughing, because we know this, and we meet every month. We go to different occasions and weddings or whatever it is, and once a month I know that I have and in between we meet singly or so, and just be Kenyan and be Kenyan women in a very, very safe space, but also, go on with our language. We speak Swahili, we mix it up, we mix languages like crazy, and it's like food for my soul. And this is one of those things that people who straddle countries, cultures, might miss, I believe. And if there could be such, it's something I encourage quite a bit. So I feel warm and fuzzy inside, and we cook what we cook. Some of the stuff that we eat in Kenya, my family here will be like, they eat it begrudgingly, but I sit with them. I sit with my girls. And we eat, and it's about, we focus a lot on food and sharing space with food. And anecdotally, which is just to mention it, when somebody comes into my home or has visited, and even if it's an impromptu, and I'm sitting down to a meal, they better eat with me, because there is no way you can say no. Whatever I have, and this is one of the sayings in almost all our languages, whatever is in my plate can be divided by whichever number of people are in my vicinity. Everybody will eat a morsel, and everybody will be happy for it. So it was quite shocking, when somebody comes in and I say, "Come on, sit," and they said no, and they felt comfortable to say no. I was like, no, you cannot be comfortable saying no to. But those are the things, we learn, we adapt. But those are some of the unchanging parts of me that I carry.
Yeah, and it does also come back to the sort of storytelling element of the culture, about how you express yourselves in different ways. It can be food, it can be the company you keep, it can be those individual words, and you also find similarity in differences, because these words and the messages which you find so amusing, which are very specific to your culture, can only be shared by people who have experienced it. It's a shame that other cultures can't also share in this, but that maybe would be too much to expect, I guess.
They need an immersion.
Yeah. I've often sort of watched as certain conversations develop online about people from Africa, some of especially the historical stories, and obviously tragedies as well that have befallen many people from Africa over the years. And whenever somebody who is of non-African descent comes in and asks a question, some people take their time to answer them and to point them in a certain direction. But then other people are very much like, look, I'm not here to educate you. You have to educate yourself. And I don't think there's anything wrong in either one of those perspectives. But just quickly, because I know you need to go soon as well. How important do you find the voice of African people in discussions about African history and sharing cultures, as it were, in a European setting?
I think it goes without saying that they are the ones who probably know it best, at least within their circle, the realm of experience. I would not be your go-to person if you want to speak about politics or the innate nature of politics in Africa, in Kenya, in Kenya perhaps a bit, but not fully. So within our own realm, there needs to be a voice, not only in very specific technical subjects, but even within those technical subjects, one's experience at whichever level is much more welcome. And when you started the question, you said the two ways that one reacts. It's either go educate yourself, or I'll give it to you. I'll break it down for you. At some point, I've been here for almost 17 years. It's a long time, and my experiences here have shaped me in how willing or open I am to educate someone. But my experience has also taught me to read this person, whether they are being just callous in their question, whether they really want to know. I would know if somebody really wants to know and they acknowledge their ignorance in the matter, or if one is playing at know-it-all. So, of course, the way my experience has shaped me in Germany and in Europe, the very first, innately, I stiffen. I stiffen at some questions, but then I tell myself, just listen to this person. Where is this person coming from? And my first, really, the knee-jerk reaction is to say, hey, go educate yourself. we're living in this world and time where everything is global. You can find it, but I bring it down to, okay, I'll try to educate you. Just anecdotally again. And this was somebody who was being an idiot. Sorry for the use of strong word. I use stronger. But because I know this is going to go public, I'll keep it an idiot. So I was at the Chaos Communication Congress, which is a whole bunch of nerds and computer geeks, just because they have quite interesting sessions talking about from breaking down of particles in physics to how does the government control elections, things like this. And I sit there with my computer, and this guy really, literally, I did not expect that, walks up to me and says, so you have computers in Africa. So I look at him, I'm like, well, you know what? We've built like the best infrastructure on the trees we live in, with the monkeys around our backs. And we have electricity, which we, harness from, little windmills flopping about in the background. I mean, that was crossing a line. I mean, this was an extreme. But there are those people who would, genuinely want to know, how do you do this? How I also make a joke about, I can touch hot things. I don't burn until I make an anecdote and say, Black people don't burn. That's why we don't cremate. But that's going behind it. But generally, the very first knee-jerk reaction in some cases when questions are asked is to stiffen up. You're like, you feel the prejudice in the question, even when it's not there. And so, which is why more voices should be given to Africans within talking about things that relate to them publicly within the media, which rarely happen.
Yeah, far too many European experts in Africa as opposed to African experts from Africa. Very much. I know you have to run off, Flora, so I will look forward to our future communications in any case. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your storytelling and your anecdotes and your big smile, which only I will see because this is a podcast. And I wish you well and look forward to the next one.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you, and a lot more has come out of this. So I look forward to our next.